Hey everyone, Rock DIY. I just purchased this Hercules beam cutter. What I'm going to do is show how to install it and some things that you'll run into along the way as far as which parts to use, which parts not to use. The instructions are not very clear with some things, so it could cause some confusion when you're trying to assemble it. The circular saw that I'm going to use is a Makita 15 amp circular saw. And this one in particular is a 5007F. And this is a 7¼ blade size. If you buy this Hercules beam cutter, this is what you're going to get in the kit. This portion of it will be already pre-assembled, so there isn't much that you need to do with that. Then you're going to have a bracket here, which has a hex screw. This may be assembled or maybe not, but just so you're aware of what you're getting here. There's a hex screw here. You got a T-nut, a washer, and 10mm nut on the back side. You got another hex screw right here, and then you got numerous arbor bolts to choose from depending on the type of circular saw you're using. And then you will also have two of these flanges. This one is an 8 and this one is a 10. And then you will also have this here, which is a inner bushing. And then you'll have, specifically over here, you'll see in the instructions, I've kind of split these up a little bit because based on the circular saw that I'm using, which is the Makita, I know that I'm going to need this bracket, this screw, and then I'll need this bolt, arbor bolt, and then I'll need this here. And then it comes with a hex wrench, a T25, and a T27. I know I'm going to need that hex wrench there. Pretty much everything over here I am not going to use. The beam cutter comes with instructions. The only issue with the instructions is, and I can kind of understand why they're not very clear, because the arbor bolts that you use, whether you use the bushing, which pieces are going to be used is dependent on the type of circular saw that you use. I didn't say it up front, but this will only work with the 7¼ inch blade circular saws. It's not going to work with a smaller one or a bigger one. This kit does work with quite a few different types of circular saws. The depth of the beam cutter chain, according to the user instructions, is 12 inches. And when I put it on my circular saw, I get 12 inches right to the very tip of one of the cutters. These are some tools and other things that you'll need while you're doing this, because they're not included. So you may need a flat tip screwdriver, cross tip, or Phillips. You're going to need a 13mm wrench. I've got these wrench ratchets, and this is specifically needed for my type of circular saw. And then also we got a 10mm. You're going to need, well, you can either use a 10mm socket or you can use a wrench. And where you're going to need that is on here. And this is the one 10mm nut that you're going to have to tighten. You are going to need some bar chain oil, and if you don't have that, you can use 30-weight oil. This is bar chain oil in here. This bottle doesn't come with it. This is one I just happen to have on hand that I'm going to use to fill this before I put it on. And I always say put the oil in before you put it on, because it's going to be very difficult to get to this once it's on. The other thing that you'll need is a square, because you need to make sure everything is at 90 degrees once it's all assembled. In the back of the booklet, there is a list of the parts, and then also there is a diagram. What I've done, just for my good, is I've marked the things that are already pre-assembled with black, and then the things that I need to worry about are the ones that are dotted in green, which is the majority of this side is marked green. But when it comes to the arbor bolts, that's where basically you're going to be testing to figure out which one in particular goes on your circular saw. Should go without saying, but I'm gonna say it anyways. If you're using a corded circular saw, definitely make sure that it is unplugged. If you're using a battery operated, make sure that there is no battery on the circular saw before you start. So on this Makita circular saw, the locking mechanism for the blade is right there. So I'm going to push that in, and then using a 13mm socket, go ahead and remove the arbor bolt. Remove this outer flange and then remove the blade. On this one, you got the inner flange, and this one I found out that I needed to use, so this one I'm going to keep handy. Now what I've got to do is remove this split locking ring here. Take this little rubber bumper off first. Now I can take this spring off. Now I can take that off. Before you start doing this, you want to make sure that you fully extend your base plate out. Mine should already be all the way out. This is fully extended and locked. Now you'll have to go through some steps to determine what arbor bolts, what flanges are necessary. That is exactly what I did, except one thing they tell you to do is take the inner flange off. The issue I had is that based on the bolt that I have to use, or the arbor bolt that I have to use, and if I put everything on, by the time I get this bolt all the way down, there's probably like a 1/4 inch left, and so it will not tighten, which I could just put some washers on there. The other thing that you'll discover is that it tells you that you're supposed to put this inner bushing on. The issue is if I put this inner bushing on, it'll go on, but once I go to put this on, this inner bushing is going to push this all the way out to the outside of the base plate, and it's not going to work because this portion of it needs to be up inside this housing. The instructions lead you to believe that you do have to use this, but the other issue with using this is that if you look right here, it's recessed, and if I take this bushing out completely, this portion that's recessed will fit nicely over that. But what I do have to do is take this inner flange that was originally on the circular saw. This one's side's completely flat, and then this side has a portion that's raised. So what I have to do is put this on here, making sure that the raised portion is to the inside, and it will spin freely. If I put the flat side, what's going to happen is it's going to wear this part and probably make the circular saw pretty heated from rubbing. So you got to make sure that raised portion is to the inside to avoid that friction. It goes on there just right. Before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead and fill this reservoir. I'm going to fill it to about there. I forgot to mention this, but I was talking about the issue with taking this flange off and then putting the arbor bolt on with the beam cutter. There was a 1/4 inch left at the top towards the head, So what I did is put this piece back in, and what that does is it pushes this out further so that it takes up that gap that's there. Put this flange back in with the raised portion towards the circular saw. Take the beam cutter, slide it back through. That on there. Put the flange back on. Take the arbor bolt, put that on, and there we go. And that's not tightened all the way down, but it is, there's no space and it's not even wiggling. So that is what I had to do to put this on this circular saw. Not completely done yet, but that's what has to be done. Now what I'm going to do is lock this down. I'm going to tighten this arbor bolt. Next step is going to be to put this mount on, and when you do put it on, you want it to be like this. So this piece will be going up, and then you're going to have this screw and this T-nut in here. You want this above here. You don't want it underneath. This will go on top. Put the washer and the nut on the bottom side. And then you have this hex screw. It needs to go in sideways here. That screw is tightened down. Now, what I'm going to do is use a 10mm socket to tighten the nut on the bottom. As far as tightening this down, what I'm doing is looking at the line along here and the line of the base plate to see that it is straight. It's a little bit off. All right, so that's tightened, and that's tightened. Now, the next thing to do is make sure the base plate is at 90 degrees. Now, as far as adjusting to make sure that this is 90 degrees, what you're supposed to do is take a square. Doesn't tell you exactly how to do it, but if you take a square, place it up against there. It's close, but a little bit off. So one of the things that you have to assume when they want you to ensure this is at 90 degrees is you have to assume that this splitter is straight, and it may not be straight. What we'll have to do is place my square here, and then as far as getting it straight, make sure this is loose. All right, so I'm flat on the plate and I'm flat on the splitter. So I'm going to tighten this down. Before you even attempt to plug this in and see if it works, definitely check to make sure that everything is tightened down. It is ready to operate. So I don't know for sure whether this will throw oil like a traditional chainsaw, but from what I see, I don't see any oil being thrown. but maybe it needs to be inverted in order to do that. This is a test and only a test. Got a 2x4 piece of pine here. I'm just going to test to see how it cuts, if there's any issues. And of course, taking necessary precautions, being that this is the first test of it. One of the things to see right away is it's definitely an upcut because the bottom side is nice and clean. The top side is pretty messed up, but it cut pretty good. A pretty straight cut. And one of the things I did notice is that the flange right here is off center because it's not exactly the same size as the Arbor Bolt. So it looked like it was kind of oscillating. So you're supposed to get about 12 inches of cut. Based on how I have this set up right now, I'm getting 11 5/8. So even though the instructions say to fully extend the base plate, you could loosen up your hex screw and drop the plate down some as long as there's no interference with anything, and potentially get more cut, because it does say that you get 12 inches of cut, and that's definitely not 12 inches. I'm not sure about the oiler working properly. I'm not sure how much oil it's supposed to put out. It is a small oil reservoir, but maybe it just puts a tiny bit on the chain and that's it, and it's not going to throw any. I'm not sure yet, but doesn't really look like any oil's coming out at this point. Some things to know when you are storing this. This is probably not the best way to store it if possible. You want to store it so that the base plate is flat on the surface. Like that. And the reason why, it's okay if you put it like this temporarily, but if you leave it like that, this is what's going to happen. Every bit of the oil that was in this reservoir drained out. I had this sitting on a table over there overnight. When I came out this morning, it was completely drained. Another thing to check is, due to the vibration of the chain cutting, you definitely want to check all of those things that previously checked when putting it together, but you also want to check everything else too. Because one thing I noticed right away after that little bit of cutting, the chain is looser than it was when I started. But you definitely want to check your Arbor Bolt, your T-nut, and the hex screws that were put in. And you also want to check these other ones. There's some hex screws here, and just check them to make sure that they're not going to fall off while you're operating it. You could adjust this if you want to get more of a cut from your beam cutter, and you can do this before you completely have it assembled or after you test it out, and then determine that you want to make some adjustments to it. What you have to do is loosen the 10mm nut down here so that this moves freely. You don't need to touch the Arbor Bolt. And then what you want to do is take the brake off of your base plate so that you can move it. Now, what you do have to pay attention to right here. So I can move this up, but the issue becomes this part right here is going to stick out and you won't be able to cut. So what you have to do is manipulate it to where this piece right here is above the base plate. So about right there, what you can do is just look straight down here, get it lined up, and then you can tighten it back down and then check to see how much how much more length you got making that adjustment. Just double checking to make sure there's not going to be any interference. Okay, so this is tightened back down, this is here. Now, because I did mess with it, what I'm going to do is check it to make sure it's still 90 degrees. And it is. Now I'm going to measure to see how much more I got, because I think it was 11 5/8 I got before. Well, let's see what I have now. It's about 12 1/8 all the way to the tip of one of the cutters, so gained a little bit more by doing that.